Today I want to delve into a question that I get asked a lot, which is, when is an artwork finished? Or how do I know when a piece is done? And it's a very kind of organic process for me because of the way that my artwork develops and the way that I have been making my process for a while. So I wanted to just share a little bit about how I go from start to finish and when I ultimately decide that a piece is done. When I work, it's usually, whether it's prints or paintings or other kind of two-dimensional media, my process usually evolves organically. So it goes through a couple or a few stages. So stage one is sort of preliminary thinking and color studies. So I will, particularly if I'm going to be working in a series, which I often do, and even if it's not a series per se, it's usually like a block of pieces which have a common theme or common element. So I'll often start planning out like color or the color scheme that I want to use that stays relatively consistent throughout all the pieces in that group or series. And then stage two, I start putting materials to paper. So whether that's screen printing or whether that's drawing or painting, I will start by just making initial marks on a page or a canvas or a panel. That could be abstract marks with watercolor paint or acrylic paint. That could also be screen prints of a particular object or a couple objects. And so the reason why I work in series is because I'll often use the printmaking tool of multiple copies and make multiple, like 20 at a time, prints. And that way I can layer them up in different ways and they're not all the same, but I can still get the most out of the printmaking media. Stage three is very important, but it might not seem like it should be its own stage, but it is. Putting it in a drawer or letting the pieces dry on a drying rack. And the reason why this is an actual stage and not just a pause is that in order to come at a piece with fresh eyes, it's really important to let it rest and kind of get it out of your mental focus. If I'm too invested in a piece, it often will evolve badly. In other words, I'll overwork it or I won't see things clearly and I'll end up with pieces that I don't like because they're just too jumbled or I'm too involved with one area. So putting it to bed, taking a step back, working on something else, letting it dry is a really important stage. And it will often be alternated with some of the other stages because of the way that I work layering up different materials. There needs to be some rest time in order to come back to it and see what needs to happen. So that's stage three. And then stage four is to take a long look. And this is another really important stage, which can often take hours. And it can get a little frustrating because when I'm working, I only have a limited time in my studio. So to give myself this time for this stage is important, but it can also feel as an artist like wasting time, like you're not actually accomplishing anything, especially if you're like me and being project driven, you like to accomplish things. But I'll emphasize this again, that taking a step back, letting a piece sort of marinate without looking at it is important. And then also taking it back out and looking at it for a long time is also equally important. And this will help you see, again, with fresh eyes, what needs to be worked on, what can be added, what can be maybe subtracted or covered over. And without these two steps kind of alternating along with adding of materials, then it's just hard to see where the piece is going and then ultimately when it's finished. So those are the stages for the way that I work. And it can be like a short amount of time if a piece is evolving quickly or it's kind of has a clear direction. But if it's not, it can often take, you know, months of putting it away and bringing it back out, working on it and putting it away and bringing it back out. And sometimes it just doesn't end up working at all. And I decide that it's finished when I cut it up and use it in another piece, or I paint over it and, you know, completely obliterate what I had on there, which is okay too. But some of the things that I will look for as I'm working to determine whether I need to add more or what I need to add to a piece are formal characteristics, meaning like color, line, shape, composition, specificity, abstraction. And what I'm looking for instance, in color is, does there need to be like an accent color, a pop of something contrasting, like a complementary color? If a overall piece is like in the blues and grays, do I need to add like a pop of orange? Another thing would be shape versus line. So often I'll start out very amorphous and there's more big general shapes to a piece, and then I'll have to get more specific and, you know, use more delicate lines to complement or balance out what's happening with the larger shapes or the more general shapes, or vice versa. If there's too much detail, sometimes I'll have to cover over with collage or paint and eliminate some of the detail because it gets too busy. Another formal characteristic would be sort of a recognizable or representational versus abstract. And because I like to use recognizable objects like the Bolex camera or the fan, sometimes they'll get layered on first and then overlaid with something more abstract, meaning more reduced down to elements, not so specific and recognizable. Or sometimes I'll start with something more abstract shape wise and then build up the specificity and recognizable objects and sort of end on a very clear note. And that is another way that I can keep assessing whether a work is finished. If it is still lacking something, then I'll have to go back, put it away, repeat stage 3 and 4, bring it back out, stare at it, compare it to other pieces, see what's missing, what I need to add, and then go from there. So in all of these observations, when I bring them out and look at them, what I'm really looking for is contrast, whether there's too much of one thing and not enough of another, and how I can balance out the piece. So sometimes I like to put in that tension, whether it's overly specific or overly, you know, on one color palette versus another. But generally, when I know that it's finished is when it's well balanced and I can't think of adding anything else or subtracting anything else in order to make it visually pleasing to me or say what I want it to say. So I hope that helps answer the question pretty in depth, and you can leave comments or let me know if you have similar feelings or a totally different process. Would be super fun to hear about.